right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming on such a beautiful evening. We appreciate your taking the time to be with us tonight. My name is Suzanne Conley, and I am the chair and one of the co-founders of Save Greater Dowses Beach. I hope I don't mess up this PowerPoint here. Oh, no, Cindy. She told me it was just the arrows. Cindy, the arrows aren't working. Anyway, Save Greater Dowses Beach has been in existence for 3 years now. In August, it will be our 3rd anniversary. Isn't that funny? She froze up. It was working. She's going to stay calm in a crisis, I hear. So we are a 501c4 organization, which means we are a tax exempt organization. There we go. I'm on that slide now.
Okay,
There
so
we go.
now it's these arrows,
Which arrows?
up and down.
Oh, up and down. We got it. All right. So here I have a list of the folks who have been working to oppose the cable landings in Barnstable for going on 3 years. I really want to point out my co-founder, Stacy Gunther. Stacy, a lot of you know her. She's a very well-known individual here in town. She works so hard to achieve our ends. And the folks listed here really comprise what we call our steering committee for the group. I want to mention before I go on, not one single one of us denies climate change. And we all agree that we do need to make in our world a transition away from fossil fuels and try to get to cleaner energy. Our opinion is this is not clean and it's not green. Okay. I just want to mention the big three. I'm sorry, I want to mention the plan of the evening. First, we're going to let you know why we oppose these cable landings, because sometimes people say, what's the big deal? And then we want to get you caught up on what's happening at the 3 government levels, federal, state, and local. I'll then talk about what SGDB's efforts are as we continue this fight. And finally, how community members can help achieve our goals. And I'm hoping that all of you here share our goal, which is to prevent these cable landings in our beautiful town of Barnstable. Or I should say more cable landings. I put this together because I wanted folks to see the extent of the Biden administration's plan to build offshore wind farms all along the east coast of the United States. I actually, New Jersey looks a little messed up because I had to put these maps together so it doesn't look like a perfect peanut. But as you can see, these wind farms lease areas go all the way from the Outer Cape down to past South Carolina. There are 50 of them. There are a few under construction, like Dominion off of the coast of Virginia, Vineyard Wind, south of Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket is under construction, and Empire Wind was just given the green light to go back into construction. Some, like New England Wind 1, which is the project that intends to land at Craigville Beach over in Centerville, is fully permitted. That means the federal and state governments have fully permitted that project. Others, like New England Wind 2, which has plans to land 3 cables at Dowses Beach, is not fully permitted because the state hasn't finished its permitting process with that project. Then I'm going to zoom in so you can see exactly where the projects would be located on the outer continental shelf. You see the green patches down there? There's one right in the middle with a sort of diagonal line across it. The upper section is Vineyard Wind. The lower section is New England Winds 1 and 2. And that all belongs to Avangrid, that lease area. And you can see why they think they should bring the cables into Barnstable, go right through the Muskeget cut there, right between Nantucket and Muskeget and Martha's Vineyard. Of course, as you know, they've already run 2 cables into Cobbles Beach. And right now, Vineyard Wind is still under construction. They are planning for 62 turbines. They have 4 running right now. To zoom in even more, we have this map that is courtesy of Avangrid. If you look and see the blue line, you see the sort of semicircular beach right at the bottom there? That's Craigville, of course. Cobal's on the right, Craigville's further along, and then the little peninsula there that sticks out as Dowses. The blue lines that run from Craigville Beach will go up through the town, right through, what they want to do is go right through Centerville Village, right through the center. They do have an alternate route, but they told the folks of Centerville they'd rather go right through the village. The issue with that, and of course, we've embraced our friends in Centerville very much. We work very closely with Barnstable Speaks, and their problem is our problem too. And we really worry about that because if you think about that beautiful area, it's going to lose a lot of those gorgeous 200-year-old trees. It's going to assuredly damage the foundations of some of those very old buildings. Avangrid has even admitted that, and just disrupt that village to no end. 3 years, they say 3 years. The way they operate, I say, well, it'll probably be closer to 4. And that's to build those cables into Craigville Beach, pull them all the way through Centerville Village and up to a substation on Chute Flying Hill Road where the current motel is. If you look further to the left, you see the purple lines. Well, those are the proposed routes for cables that would land at Dowses Beach. We've been told by our local elected officials, state elected officials, that, oh no, they're not gonna go to Dowses, don't worry about it. We don't trust that at all, because this company does what it wants. This is what we've discovered. But those purple lines represent their idea of how they should route cables from Dowses Beach all the way through either up to Oak Street. And their 2 routes are either Old Mill, which is their least preferred route, or right through that gorgeous little village center that we have here in Osterville, the Osterville Village Center, and then through residential neighborhoods, just like they're planning to do in Centerville. And we have reasons to really object to that. The one thing I'll point out, and this is not something they talk about a lot, the substations are kind of clearly indicated. See that yellow box up there? It's replicated down here. They never talk about the fact that they're also talking about a substation on Old Yarmouth Road, which would be sort of near Flint Street. And they also indicate a cable going up Wiano. They told us a long time ago the Duck Bank would have 12 sort of cells for the cables after they're spliced. And I said, but you have 3 cables coming into Dowses. You splice them into 3. Why do you have 12 cells? Oh, just to have some extra, which didn't make sense to me until I saw this map and I saw the 4th cable, but who knows? One of our biggest concerns with all of this is that Barnstable would be awash in EMF, electromagnetic field. When we first talked to Avangrid, they used to come here to the library and they would say things like, oh, it'll be undetectable. I remember distinctly they used that term. And they said, it will be no more than what you experience in your home, which is 1 to 2 milligauss. That's the unit of measure to detect EMF. Then they said these cables emit no more than a hairdryer. Well, I actually put my EMF meter up against my hairdryer and it registered 40 milligauss. And of course, you only dry your hair for a few minutes. Well, I do at least. If you have more hair, longer, less time. But this is my reading at Cobal's Beach with 4 turbines running, 90 milligauss. This is getting into the range that is called high. Do not remain long in that area. The difference is you dry your hair, and it's over. These things run 24/7. And we're talking about EMF coming in from 7 400 megawatt cables. Together, these cables would run the equivalent of 3.5 times the electricity that had been produced by the former Pilgrim Nuclear Power Plant, all in Barnstable. We feel, and you remember that slide with the 50 projects, of all the coastal communities in the United States, Barnstable would be hammered the worst if they have their way. And that's why we fight. That we're talking about way too much infrastructure in our town, in our opinion. Other people think, what's the big deal? Well, we think it's a big deal. These are the big three reasons we fight. And I want to point out, one of the handouts you had tonight is a two-sided sheet. One of the sides of that sheet gives great detail. I want to shout out to Hector and Stacy Gunther. They put it together and it details all of our objections, which is, and it's a great read. So make sure you take that. But here are the big three reasons we fight. We believe very strongly that recreation beaches are not a place to pull in giant extra high voltage cables, all right? We just don't feel that's right. For example, the Dominion project down off of the coast of Virginia, they're going into the Norfolk Naval Base. That's where they just, and in Europe, they frequently go into industrial areas or military sites. But these folks want to come into our recreational beaches. And the thing that worries us the most are these splicing vaults. The splicing vaults are 61 by 9 by 8. They're 61 feet long. They're called the manholes, but they are splicing vaults. So they take this massive cable that's this big, they pull it into the parking lot splicing vault, and they turn it into 3 cables in each splicing vault. There are 2 at Coble's, there would be 2 at Craigville, and there would be 3 at Dowses. And our research shows that splicing vaults are susceptible to fire and explosion, due especially to the infiltration of moisture. That's what causes accidents at these splicing vaults, moisture. This winter, we witnessed one of the local septic companies pumping out the splicing vaults at Coble's. And so our question was, why are these splicing vaults underwater? Is that a good thing? You're calling it a manhole. Do you plan to send divers down there if there's an issue? I don't know why you'd need a septic truck to come pump out a splicing vault that's full of high voltage electricity, but we have yet to get an answer. I write to them all the time and ask them, you know, this question, that question. They don't respond anymore. They don't like me. I'm not sure why. They just don't. But anyway, and I already mentioned the fact that we're talking 20 miles of extra high voltage. If you bought your home next to a high voltage facility, that's your decision you made. Suddenly, you're going to have high voltage 8 to 9 feet underground right in front of your house. And that's a decision you didn't make. And we're talking about dozens of residential neighborhoods in our town that would have no say in the matter if this goes through. Finally, we oppose very strenuously the building of massive substations directly over the sole source aquifer and on land important to the watershed and future wellhead access. Now, we have maps from the county commission mapping out where these areas are, and they're mostly north of Route 6, but it's right next to where they want to put these substations. The thing about substations is they use very toxic substances, hundreds of thousands of gallons of what's called dielectric fluid, and no one can convince us that a spill, a major spill, would not penetrate the substrate and affect the aquifer. 1 gallon spill would contaminate and make unpotable 1 million gallons of drinking water. So we'll have more about that in a bit. I should have said, I know you all have lots of questions, maybe some comments. We're trying to do this quickly so that we'll have plenty of time for that, all right? So get a little more interactive. In Washington, I don't know, in November, I don't know if you heard, but the administration changed. And suddenly, things looked up for us in terms of stopping these ocean wind farms. There's a president now who's very much in disfavor of them as a big part of the nation's future energy independence plan. And he has put in place folks like the new Secretary of the Interior, Doug Burgum, and the new head of the EPA, Lee Zeldin, the new head of energy, Chris Wright. And this is an administration that has really taken something of a jaundiced eye toward that plan to put 50 of these things out there, okay, to industrialize the ocean on the East Coast. And we're hoping that the executive order on day one was, I want you all to look at these projects, see how they were cited and permitted, and find a legal way to withdraw their permits. That's how bold that executive order was. Congress, we all have heard about the big, beautiful bill, and they can't use that name. They just can't. But anyway, the House, of course, has approved it, and it's now in the Senate. The Senate is looking for major pay-fors. In other words, yeah, we want to reduce taxes on the American people, but we're gonna have to pay for that. We want to increase funding on the military, but we have to pay for that. Well, the House has said we want to, excuse me, the House has said we want to phase out what are called tax credits that allow these wind farms to be built. And because my colleague Hector Gunther knows so much more about tax credits than I do, I'm going to ask him to come up and just talk about those tax credits and how they factor into the construction of these farms.
Thanks, Suzanne. I'm Hector Gunther, 8-year resident of Barnstable. Finance person, my kids say I'm a numbers person. I worked as a banker in Manhattan. We're financing and advising multinational companies just like Iberdrola and Avangrid. The tax credits, the fundamental thing about these offshore wind projects is the economics don't work for any of the developers unless they get subsidies from the federal government or the state government, but the federal government is the most ready source. In 2022, Congress passed and Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act. And that contains several tens of billions of investment tax credits for renewable energy, including things like if you buy an electric car, or if you build a geothermal plant, or if you any number of renewable sources. One of the main ones is offshore wind. All of the developers that Suzanne put up on that slide up and down the East Coast, they're all foreign companies, and they're all here because they see these tax credits. And just as an example, so we'll take an example of a project, say $6 billion to build the Park City Wind project at Craigville Beach. And that's probably not far off. The tax credits amount to about a third of that number, or about $2 billion. The federal government is not writing a check, but in effect, it is a subsidy. It is not an equity investment. It is not a loan that the developer has to pay back. It's a tax credit. The new tax bill makes noises about withdrawing these tax credits or phasing them out. We believe that the quickest way to stop these projects is to undermine the economics. Economics depend on these subsidies. If the tax credits are withdrawn or phased out, a lot of those 50 projects will not get built during the current administration. One of the developers, a company called Orsted, it's a Danish company. They announced a couple months ago that they were going to put everything on hold for 4 years. What about that? They're hoping that they get a friendly administration in 4 years' time and they can resume. All of these companies are taking the long view. So when we talk about Avangrid and continuing to fight Dowses and Craigville and even Vineyard Wind, we're hoping that that gets stopped. It is the subject of court challenges. But all of these companies, they have 10-year plans, 20-year plans. So, don't think a mere 4-year interruption is going to halt them necessarily. But if you take away the tax credits, they're all going to pick up their chips and go home. So that's a summary of the tax credit issue.
Thank you, Hector. On Beacon Hill, there is continued support for offshore wind, although the language about her renewal, Governor Healy's quest to go to net zero has been muted. She is understanding that offshore wind is becoming an increasingly unpopular concept here in Massachusetts. So she just doesn't say offshore wind, but the things she's doing indicates that she's going to go right ahead still. When Avangrid reneged on their power purchase agreement to sell the electricity they wanted to bring into Craigville, they had to go back with a new 83C4 solicitation to purchase that electricity. At the end of this, it's supposed to be that the utility companies, in concert with the state, are going to conclude their negotiations with Avangrid about the price point to sell that electricity. That's the kilowatt hour number you see on your increasingly high electric bills. They have postponed this a few times, and I think it has to do with the uncertainty facing this industry. We were very surprised. I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, when the state, when the administration announced that they were going to go out with a new 83C solicitation to purchase offshore wind electricity called, this is 83C5. And in the announcement, they said, and possibly number 6 too. So they're going to try to buy more offshore wind electricity from projects that may or may never get built. So it was kind of an odd thing to hear about. But the governor's new energy bill, the thing that worries me there is that she's authorizing what's called rate reduction bonds, which will allow the developers, the utility companies to securitize their investment in all of this infrastructure by getting investment and then paying their investors back with the promise that they can charge ratepayers through the roof for, in perpetuity. So if you think that you've seen the worst of the rise in electric bills, you haven't. I'm so positive, huh? When I retired here, all I wanted to do was go to the beach and play golf. But it didn't work out that way. Our lovely town council, we have representatives here from our town council, and we very much appreciate all the work they do. I believe it was in October, the town council unanimously voted no to any use of Dowses Beach to land offshore wind cables. So we were very pleased with that. Now, that doesn't constrain a future town council, but it sure sends a message to Avangrid that forget Dowses Beach, And to tell you the truth, the whole interaction between Avangrid and the town council over the Craigville easements, it wasn't easy for them, but they had signed not a power purchase agreement. They had signed a post-community agreement. Then Avangrid reneged, and the town's position was, well, all bets are off. Avangrid, to make a long story short, and if anyone wants to fill in the blanks, please feel free, President Tamish. But Avangrid really threatened to sue them. If you don't give us the Article 97 easements, we will sue you. And I believe it was that threat that caused the town council in executive session to authorize the signing of Article 97 easements. Now, if you've listened to me before, Article 97 is an amendment to the Massachusetts Constitution, and it protects public lands from other use. That's the easiest way to say it. And it was really the last things Avangrid needed to take Craigville were easements from Article 97 for Craigville. And when those easements were signed, now we didn't know this had happened until 2 weeks after the signing. And so we have gone to court, and it's not because we're trying to be personal toward our town councilors. Again, we appreciate what they do, but we feel that waiting for 2 weeks precluded the people of Barnstable from using what the town charter allows, which is 10 days to mount a referendum to challenge a decision by the town council. And that's what we're fighting out in court. The judge denied our request, not on merit, but on, I don't want to say technicality. It was a little more than that, but we've appealed that decision, and we're going to continue to appeal that decision until the end. So we are in court fighting for Craigville, because our thinking is, if you prevent them from going to Craigville, you definitely prevent them from going to Dowses Beach, the way they have to put these cables in the ocean. So that's why we're spending a lot of time and treasure. We're not giving up on Craigville, and that's why we work so closely with the folks in Centerville to make sure that, they know that we're fighting for them too. This has become larger than Dowses. Talk about mission creep. I mean, at first we were like the birds, but then the more we learned, the bigger the fight became. And we, like many of us, most of us have just decided offshore wind is not the way to go. All right. So you stop those projects out there in the ocean, you definitely can save Dowses Beach. So that we just learned last week, and we were very grateful that the town was willing to share this with us, that the town has been informed by Avangrid of a revised construction schedule for New England Wing 1, the Craigville landings, and they're not going to start construction until the fall of 2026. They were going to start after Labor Day this year. They're saying a fall of 2026 now. That gives us and our lawsuit more time to hold their feet to the fire on this and make things uncertain for them. I think that's really important. I'm gonna turn it back over to Hector because he's going to talk about a myth. There's been a myth out there, and I still hear it to this day, that Avangrid is paying for our sewer. And so Hector, take it away.
So when we started all this 3 years ago, one of the earliest metaphors I heard was that Avangrid, through all of its open houses, was trying to convince the town that every time we flush our toilet, we should say, thank you, Avangrid. Well, and the implication being that they're paying the cost of the project. Well, what we have up here are some numbers that will disabuse you of that idea. So Suzanne mentioned the side agreement that the town council signed for the Park City Wind project. So that's the most recent contract that we have for an offshore wind project. That's not quite a year old. And it's a side agreement that conveys certain financial benefits to the town. Now, if you take the cash flows from that side agreement, there's an HCA fee. There are funds that Avangrid is going to give to the town to offset increased costs of installing sewer. There's a contribution that they're making to the high school, $500,000. And then there's, I think, $2.4 million of money that they're going to give to the town to help construct sidewalks and curbs along the roads where they're installing the duct banks, these 8-foot by 10-foot thermal concrete duct banks. And as Suzanne said, there's 20 miles of that through the town if all 3 of these projects get built. So if you take those cash flows, and it's money paid over 25 years, and you discount them back to today's dollars, it amounts to about $28 million. Those are the financial benefits to the town. That's the incentive. But in percentage terms, calculated in today's dollars, that money represents 2.02% of the $1.4 billion cost of the comprehensive wastewater management plan, AKA the sewer. And I've shown up here the math, 28.3 million divided by 1.4 billion equals 2.02%. And then there's a couple of other examples. This shows what a pittance it is to Avangrid. So their budget is rough for Park City Wind, also known as New England Wind 1. Their budget is roughly $6 billion. That's in, give or take. That 28 million amounts to less than half of 1% of Avangrid's cost to construct that project. And when you think about it, they need a municipality, they need a place, unless they've got a naval base, and they don't in this case, they need a place to land the cables. So we have, we're pretty important to the project. Without our acquiescence, the project can't get built. But they're proposing to pay us 0.5% of their overall construction costs. Frankly, that's a ripoff, in my opinion. And then one other comparison, if you look at the town's fiscal year 2026 budget, which is in round numbers, about $278 million, and you multiply that times 25 years, that's the term of the host community agreement, the side agreement. This money amounts to about 0.4% of the town's budget over 25 years. So again, would you say thank you, Avangrid, when you flush your sewer if you saw this? I wouldn't. So that's it. That I hope, and I'm happy to answer questions at the end. Let me just talk about a couple of other, and I'm going to get a little wonky on you, but I think it's important to know about this. So that's $6 billion. How's Avangrid going to finance that? So as we talked about before, about a third of it, or about $2 billion, comes from investment tax credits. That's money that Avangrid does not have to put up. Then in round numbers, they're going to borrow about $3.5 billion from a group of banks in a construction loan. And that loan will be secured by the assets of the project. Remember, it's a loan to a limited liability company. So a group of banks, probably led by JP Morgan and Wells Fargo, will lend Avangrid in a construction loan, $3.5 billion. And then for the sake of argument, I'm going to assume that Avangrid or Iberdrola is going to put in about 500 million in the form of equity, money that they'll have at risk in the project. So that's the important point about that is the bank loan is secured by all the assets. What are the assets? The turbines offshore, the cables coming into shore, the thermal concrete conduit, duct banks underneath our streets, and then very importantly, the power station, the substation at the end. Those are the assets that the banks will have first claim on as senior secured lenders. If something goes wrong, those lenders will be first in line to get any payback. Frankly, I don't know if and then maybe you could comment, but I don't know, if I had a defunct offshore wind project, I don't know as a lender if I could get anything for the turbines or the cables. But the point being that they're first in line, and guess who is a senior, who's an unsecured creditor getting in back of the line? The town of Barnstable, the residents and the business owners. So that's another thing. And that plays into number 2 up there, which is the limited liability company structure. We've talked a lot about this before, but each of these projects is configured inside of a limited liability company, an LLC. And in the case of the Craigville project, it's inside an entity called Park City Wind LLC. And that is a entity that's ring fenced from the parent company, from Avangrid and never mind Iberdrola, the big Spanish power company that's the 100% owner of this company. And to make things worse, so it's a 4th tier. Park City Wind LLC is a 4th tier limited liability subsidiary, limited LLC. Its immediate corporate parent, the 3rd tier subsidiary, guess what? It's also an LLC. So there are 2 layers of ring fencing. So again, something goes wrong. It's likely that this thing would be put in bankruptcy. We're just looking for crumbs. We have no legal rights. We're certainly not ahead of the senior lenders in the bank group. So, the third comment I want to make is, if something does go wrong and payments stop, chances are the LLC will be put into bankruptcy by the parent company, and then people will be fighting for scraps, and Barnstable will not have any recourse of any sort. And then the one last thing that's impacting all these projects, and Suzanne mentioned this earlier, is the current state of the economy. So what's going on? We have inflation ticked up a little bit today, and that people forecast that it's going to go up higher. You have supply chain issues. A lot of the material to build these projects comes from offshore. For example, these power cables, the cables that Suzanne mentioned, they're about 16 or 18 inches in diameter. They're made by foreign companies, particularly a British company. The third issue is tariffs. So I believe the latest tariff on steel is 50%. And each of these turbines, and for Barnstable, we're talking about 200 turbines if all 3 projects get built. Each of them is built on a huge steel monopile. Where does that steel come from? Some of it they might be able to source domestically, but they have to make a lot of it offshore. Avangrid, they basically aren't going to know what their costs are going to be until all this tariff stuff is sorted out, until inflation runs its course, until the supply chain issues are sorted out. So they're facing a lot of uncertainty. So long story short, they are currently negotiating for the Park City Wind Project, a power purchase agreement with Eversource and National Grid. And that contract will determine what Avangrid is paid for the power that they sell to those 2 utilities and to the old Fitchburg Electric. That would be the 3rd utility. but they don't know what their costs are gonna be. So they've deferred the announcement of that PPA twice. We expect a third delay in the next couple of weeks because the latest announcement was the PPA was gonna be signed by the end of June. I think there's no way that that happens, but Avangrid is hostage to all these regulatory and political and economic forces. It's just creating a lot more uncertainty for them. So again, that's working in our favor, and I'm happy to address questions about this after we finish. Thank you.
Thanks, Hector. What are we doing, SGDB? Well, like I said, we're continuing with our suit, to try to overturn the Article 97 easements. We're asking a judge to, hold those in abeyance, with an injunction. We hired a registered lobbyist to help us understand what's going on in Washington DC. He's been terrific. He's a guy who actually has a house on Nantucket. So he has a dog in the fight, and he's been working so hard for us. And it's great to have that line to understand, where things are, up there or down there. We have copies of the formal petition that we filed with the EPA. We asked them to review the substation plans, and we pointed out that when citizens objected to a practice range over at Joint Base Cape Cod, they just jumped right in with the help of the governor and shut that down. And they have denied us for 3 years because their claim was no federal dollars are being used to build these projects. And with this new administration being seated, we said, you really shouldn't hide behind that any longer because those tax credits are a form of federal assistance. And we really want you to take a look at what's going on with the substations. So there's a copy of the EPA petition, and I linked this on our Facebook page as well. We've become very collaborative with a whole bunch of other offshore wind opposition groups, all up and down the eastern seaboard. As soon as the election was over, we all got together on a couple of Zoom meetings and we wrote a big long letter to President-elect Trump, and we laid out for him exactly how he could stop all these wind farms. And the funny thing was, on day one, his executive orders reflected almost perfectly the letter that we sent. So we felt good about that. We maintained social media and legacy media presence. I call Ed Lambert an awful lot, but he's been a really wonderful resource for those of us who think this is not a great idea for the town of Barnstable. And he's really been helpful in getting the word out. This has consumed our lives, most of us in the steering committee. We testify constantly on Zoom and in person. I just testified before the Joint Ways and Means Committee on Beacon Hill a few weeks ago. We write, we write big, long documents, we write letters, we call, we drive people crazy, and we're just not letting up. And then, where's Pete? Pete, come on up. We also support the CALM water negotiations with Avangrid, and if you don't know, CALM is the, I call it the Western Villages, Centerville, Osterville, Marston's Mills, and Pete Hansen is one of the water commissioners, and they're negotiating with Avangrid, so I'm gonna have Pete come up and talk about why.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Sure, Pete.
Great job, by the way. Thanks for being our fearless leader.
Oh, geez.
Thanks for everyone for coming tonight. I have to read off of this so I can keep my voice, my thoughts. Peter Hansen, I'm one of 3 water commissioners for Centerville, Osterville, Marston's Mills, Water Department. We had our monthly meeting last night at the CALM fire station in Centerville, and I asked Craig Crocker, the superintendent, if he has had any communication with Avangrid. He has not. As most of you know, the water commissioners and the superintendent agreed last fall to hold our meetings at the CALM fire station so that the public could attend and ask questions during public comment. This open format was very welcoming and positive, as it was a response to the lack of transparency that has been an issue in the towns dealing with this company. Our concerns as water commissioners is the potential harmful effects of the constant 190-degree heat coming off the duct banks on the adjacent water pipes in the surrounding soil. Heated water can introduce bacteria and other pathogens into our drinking water supply, as well as many other things, as Dr. Conway can attest to and has spoken at some of the meetings. The last Evergreen meeting in November, the water commissioners specifically requested that we get answers to what the thermal effects would be from an independent company that measures this type of heat transfer. That was the last time we saw the Evergreen representatives. Finally, we as elected water commissioners, it is our duty and responsibility to protect our drinking water for present and future generations. This is why we are so adamantly opposed to locating massive substations over our sole source aquifer. Why would you risk contaminating our drinking water supply? What would happen if Barnstable and other cave towns had contaminated water? No one can even imagine that. And I still say it's total insanity that we're talking about substations over water supply. I added this earlier. The reason that Calm Water is negotiating with Evergreen is that the water pipes are owned by Calm. And in order to install the duct banks to carry the electrical cables, many of the water pipes will have to be moved and replaced. In addition, any pipes that are within 10 feet of the duct bank will have to be insulated due to the extreme heat that will be generated by the electricity moving through these banks. Evergreen needs a signed contract from Calm Water to do this. At present, I can speak for myself and the other commissioners, we are all opposed to this. And we asked our attorney, Doug Murphy, what if none of us signed this contract? And he didn't have an answer for that. So it's to be continued, as we say. I call it a boondoggle project. Again, we need support from the community, like these public meetings, if Evergreen ever shows up again, for people to come out and express their opposition. And what Suzanne was saying, I mean, they're getting punched in different directions, which is great. And again, they can't go forward in Senate until they have a signed contract from Calm, which I don't see happening. So that's the good news. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. Pete is also a member of our steering committee, so that's great. How can you help? I'm so glad you're here, and it's such a beautiful day. We were worried that people wouldn't come, and look, you showed up. And we need you to be our ambassadors out there. Talk with your friends and neighbors about this, because what we've discovered is people say, what's this about Avangrid? Even 3 years later, there's just not a lot of understanding about what they plan to do in our town. And Stacy pointed out this morning, we went over everything this morning, and she said, people need to know that of all the coastal communities in the United States, none would be as terribly impacted as the town of Barnstable, and especially the villages of Centerville, Osterville, and West Barnstable. So we really need your help in getting that word out and talking with your neighbors, letting them know what you learned tonight. We ask you to call and write elected officials again and again. And the flip side of that document I talked about that lays out our arguments in great detail that Hector and Stacy put together, have the numbers and addresses of all the people you can call. Call them every day, who cares? There's a White House line, right? So the White House line is open a certain amount of time, I think 3 or 4 days a week. I've been calling it, hey, it's me again. I want President Trump to explain why he greenlighted Empire Wind again. And we really want to know what he's doing about all the other projects. So keep calling, let them know how the people feel about this. I hate asking for money. It's just not a natural thing for me to do, but what we do does cost money. We, all those signs that you see all over the place. And by the way, if your sign is in your garage, please take it out and put it back on your lawn, because we need more signs out there. They were popping up all over the place. Yeah, you can take any of these signs too. And we have a few signs back there. Email me if you want a sign, but, we have legal expenses, and we want to keep our Washington lobbyist working for us, and we just have expenses, and I'll just leave it there. But I do want to say every single donation, large, middling, or small, is just right. It's what we need. We need every dollar we can get. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And then consider joining us as a member of our steering committee. We would welcome new blood on our steering committee. It's a commitment of a 1.5 hour meeting every other week at 11 a.m. here in the library in the lower level, the maker space. And we do our strategizing. One of the things we talked about today, once this is all over, we're going to actually start a campaign, a very well orchestrated campaign to take EMF readings at all the so-called transects that Avangrid established. The points where they said, we came in and we measured EMF at these spots. They're called transects. And we have 4, and it's going to be soon 5 people with EMF meters. I have one myself and I go over there and I take readings all the time. But what we're going to do is really organize this so that we can show people our town is going to be drenched in EMF. While I speak of EMF, I want to point out Dr. Gary Peters is a physician. He's on our steering committee. He has learned an awful lot about the impact of EMF on human health and safety. So when we do questions and comments in a few minutes, if you have any questions, he's going to answer them. And Dr. Joe Conway is here as well, and he's learned a lot about the dangers of thermal effects of these massive duct banks on drinking water. I always tease Dr. Conway because he always said he delivered 6,000 Cape Codders into this world during his career, but he says only the best Cape Codders. So, Dr. Peters and Dr. Conway would be happy to answer any questions you have about what we call the impact on human health and safety. And believe me, if you want to go home and not sleep well tonight, look up splicing vaults exploding. All right, and they're putting 3 of those, they want to put 3 of those at Dowses, 2 of them at Craigville, and 2 of them already exist at Covels. Okay, I think that's it, Hector. I think we covered everything and we've left plenty of time for interaction. And so let's take comments and questions. Yes.
I'd like to ask Hector to elaborate a little bit more on the investment tax credit. When we think of a tax credit, it's against earned income. These operations haven't earned any income yet.
Right.
So when it comes to the investment tax credit being 1/3 of the capital expenditure, how do the cash effects work to subsidize current construction when it's a future tax credit?
That's a great question, Milton. So the way that Avangrid, the developer, gets their hands on the cash is that they get an investment bank to lead what's called a tax equity financing. So in September of, I believe, 2023, Vineyard Wind LLC, courtesy of JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, and I believe Bank of America, they underwrote a $1.3 billion tax equity financing. And the investors in that deal are people who have earned income and can use the tax credits to offset their earned income for tax purposes. So they did a $1.3 billion transaction, and then the money raised in that goes to Vineyard Wind for construction.
So what they did is move forward the cash effect
Yes,
by operating with a deal
yes,
in order to get the money now.
yes. Yeah,
Now, if you don't provide that investment tax credit,
right.
then the deal doesn't fund itself.
Then they're short $2 billion in that example that I gave.
Okay,
six
now, have they already sold those tax credits
So
to
yes,
get the cash?
so for the Vineyard Wind project, yes, they did the $1.3 billion tax equity financing. The nominal cost of the Vineyard Wind project, I think, is about $5 billion. So the 1.3 is a little bit less than a third, but 30 to 35% is the typical amount of subsidy that you can get from these tax credits. But that's the way it works. Gets a little wonky in terms of how it's financed, but
That answers it though, Hector, thank you.
yeah, good.
Eric?
Hector, got a question.
Yep.
All in with all the projects off the Cape, what's the cost?
Well, again, inflation.
Estimated.
Inflation and cost increases are going to play a role, but we estimate Vineyard Wind is about $5 billion. It may be more because of all the delays.
Right.
Vineyard Park City Wind is going to be the same size, so roughly 6 to 7 billion. And then Commonwealth Wind, the Dowses project, will probably be north of 8 or 9 billion. So all in, north of $20 billion in construction costs.
Correct. And how much electricity is that gonna provide over 20 years?
2,800 megawatts.
But how much is that in today's dollars?
You don't, I'm sorry, I don't understand measuring megawatts in
Over
dollars.
20 years, it's gonna produce these mega projects, so much electricity. I wanna know how much, is it gonna produce more than $20 million?
Oh, my God, yeah.
Well, they wouldn't be building the project if they didn't get, a return of 12 to 14 to 15% on their investment. So yeah, so Vineyard Wind has a power purchase agreement with Eversource and National Grid. And their costs are all locked in because that project was built before the inflation upsurge in the last 3 years.
Right.
But the answer to your question is yes, if they don't get if they can't sell the power for the rate that they need to sell it at, they can't do the project because these companies are not in the business of donating their services to the citizens of Massachusetts.
But someone's making
We
money
haven't-
on all this construction and everything else, so do they really worry about making their 12 to 14%, or if the thing goes south, well, look at all the money we made buying all this stuff.
Well,
No.
I think the point is that they're investing in these projects. They want to earn a return. The investment tax credits are crucial to funding the construction costs. And then, yes, over time, these contracts, these power purchase agreements or PPAs, they're 25-year, what are called offtake contracts. So Eversource and National Grid and Fitchburg Electric will agree to pay X cents per kilowatt hour for power generated from these offshore wind projects. What's different about the PPA for Park City Wind as opposed to Vineyard Wind is it has escalators in it. So the developer, Park City Wind LLC, can ask for additional price increases on their power if certain things transpire. We haven't seen that PPA yet, but in the bidding process, that's one of the changes that the state made.
And that escalation will just be.
Yeah, and then it gets passed
Okay,
along.
Kat, go ahead.
Hi, Hector, when you talked about the finances, it was, the cost of money, 45 years in the future. But aren't the wind turbines, don't they have a lifespan?
Yes.
20 years?
20 years.
So
Yeah.
they're financing something for 25 that may only last 20 years, or it may last 6 months, like the one in Nantucket. So, but that's something that people have to think about.
I want to point out, by the way, that blade that shattered last summer in July,
Still on
that blade weighed 70 tons, 70 tons,
one blade.
one blade. And we are still picking up fiberglass, epoxy resin, and PVC foam. Before the wind farms, the environmentalists used to call PVC foam poison plastic. And it's still being picked up. One of my fisherman friends sent me a picture yesterday of a great big chunk of PVC foam larger than his boat, still floating in the ocean. And I am pretty sure that the big chunk of that blade is still sitting on the ocean floor.
Right, well,
So, the cost is not just
Yeah.
financial cost, it's cost to the environment. I don't know, I haven't lived on Cape for more than 10 years. Many of you grew up here. Have you ever seen so many marine mammal strandings in your lives? No. This is just, the only thing that's changed is industrializing our ocean.
well, and would any one of us mortgage a house over a 30-year period or 25-year period, knowing the house was only going to last 20?
Yeah.
What's going to happen those last 5 years?
So you're raising a great question, and one of our steering committee members, Bob Schulte, asked me to bring this up, which is after the 25 years, Kath, and you're asking a great question. These turbines have a useful life, call it 25 or 30 years, after which they need to be rehabilitated or they need to be decommissioned. There's a big cost involved in decommissioning the turbines. In other words, taking them down. And one of the other advantages that the Biden administration gave to Vineyard Wind, as a for instance, is that they allowed Vineyard Wind not to post a bond, which would have been a couple $100 million, to put money in escrow to take account to cover the cost in the future of decommissioning those turbines. So they they waived that requirement, which would ordinarily be imposed on the developer of an offshore wind farm.
Another question up there.
Another gimme.
Go ahead.
The cost of energy when these various groups were thinking of selling the idea to the communities around Cape. Were they having projections of those costs of energy going way up when in fact, because of all the extra fossil fuel energy production that's taking place now and will continue at least for the next 3 years, is gonna bring that cost going down. So does that conflict with their profit projections based on how much money,
I'll say that the common claim by these companies is this is going to really lower your energy bills. And we have read over and over again, Hector, I know is just like me, he reads everything that comes across our desks. This is going to drive energy costs so high. This is, it costs 3 times as much to produce energy this way than it does to produce energy via natural gas. Now,
particularly when the cost of fossil fuel energy production is going to be.
correct. Now, what I said to the governor when I did get a chance to talk with her, I said, you know, there are much better ways to make this transition. It should be done smartly, and let's look into carbon capture technology. Let's look into small modular reactors, which use a new kind of nuclear fuel that is modified to not be as dangerous as, you know, the things with the great big towers. There's hydroelectric, there's geothermal. There are ways to do this that are much better. What's driving the impetus to do all this as quickly as possible is a bill that was passed in 2021. It was called the Climate Bill, and it made mandates. Like, you have to be carbon neutral by 2050. You have to reduce your carbon footprint X amount by 2030. And so all these folks jumped in, and I'm not saying they're not well-meaning, but they're not understanding that the goals set by that 2021 bill are not achievable, not at all, especially with what we're seeing happening out there in the ocean.
Yeah,
So
and I would add one thing that you mentioned, that the fossil fuel costs could potentially go down, but the state bill is requiring the utilities to purchase X% of their power from non-renewable sources, from renewable sources,
yeah.
such as hydro or offshore wind.
Or
So
solar.
the utilities won't be allowed to take advantage of lower prices. They'll be required to purchase.
There's another question in back. Oh, Rick, and then you, oh, hi, how are you?
We know that cancer has gone through the roof.
Yeah,
We're building hospitals now for cancer. But there is nothing on in the documents that state that EMF is a contributing factor or how to use EMF.
let me ask Dr. Peters to talk about EMF. Go ahead, Doc.
So because there is nothing in the law that states that EMF contributes to cancer, then it's a lot. There's nothing we can say. We can speculate.
There's plenty we can say, Jackie.
But we can't use it as law. There's a difference between speculating and having it on the record that says, okay, so we're going to have a whole lot of EMF in our community. How do we use that as one of the notions to say we don't want we don't want the cancer?
I think perhaps the law has to be changed, Jackie, and we could work toward that end as well, but I want Gary to talk about EMF and the state of affairs, because they always say, oh, it's harmless. And then Rick, after you, we'll get to you.
Try not to get too technical. There are 2 components to electromagnetic fields, an electrical field and a magnetic field. Electrical fields are shielded by concrete, the earth, insulation, etc. Magnetic fields are not. Suzanne mentioned earlier, these duct banks are going to contain cables. The duct banks are 9 feet deep. However, the cables are only going to be 5 feet below ground, and they're not going to be shielded. The magnetic component to EMF will not be shielded by the overlying earth or insulation, etc. that's going to expose people at the beaches, people along the residential areas, the streets, et cetera, to levels of EMF, which many organizations, especially in Europe, have deemed to be unacceptably high. In our homes, the baseline EMF measured in milligauss is around 2 or 3 milligauss. As you saw from Suzanne's slide, just the 3 or 4 turbines that are already operational at Cole is generating 90, and we've had readings even higher than that. Part of the problem, Avangrid and the other developers continue to quote there is one organization in the world out of Europe called the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection. That one body issued recommendations many years ago. This goes back over 20 years. It has not been updated. That one organization lists the safe threshold for EMF exposure at a much, much higher level than many other organizations have. So that to address your point, Jackie, there have been a number, in fact, many medical studies that have demonstrated increased risk of health issues, especially cancers in children, at EMF levels that would be exceeded by these cables in our community. And to your other point, Jackie, we don't need a law. We don't need a law outlawing EMF exposure. The burden of proof is on the developer, and we have facts on our side.
We just have to educate the public. 501c4s exist to educate the public, and that's what we do. I wanted to mention, we do these things a couple of times. One of the things we do in the fall in September, after all, things have quieted down a little bit, is to have something called Circle on the Sand. So everybody brings their beach chairs. We go to Dowses Beach and we update everybody. The turnout here is fabulous here tonight because we're hoping that you go out there and spread the word. And Gary's right, the cancers that are caused in children, people believe by high exposure to EMF are leukemia and brain cancers. So this is not stuff to play with. Really?
Well, you can comment on George's comment about the cost of electricity and the how free is he's been, maybe you could reflect on what we know is happening in the Big Bay, where they're on a net zero program by 2030.
Yep.
And the cost of electricity is just going absolutely out of the park. And to the point where they have to start giving fuel subsidies to households.
Right.
And then because of their budget cuts and the new administration over there, they just eliminated them. So many people far below, they got to turn their heat off.
Yeah, they had to turn their heat off. They can't afford their electric bills. A lot of people in the Commonwealth experienced this year. And the costs are being driven up by the green movement I used to be fresh and call it AOC Science Project, but it's really this idea that we cannot go forward unless we charge people more money to become green. And what's happening is it's pricing people out of existence. And in Europe, there's a huge backlash against offshore wind. They are saying enough is enough. You saw what happened in Spain when the whole country went out. They were all so proud of being completely 100% relying on renewables, and the whole thing crashed. Solar and wind are intermittent. They are not reliable forms of energy. And that's the biggest drawback to them, not to mention the fact that they use, rare earth minerals, toxic substances. They're not clean. They're not green. They use tons of diesel oil. Do you realize that when those turbines weren't spinning, they were parasitically drawing power off of the grid to keep their diesel generators running all winter long out in the ocean? And when that turbine blade shattered, all of the dielectric oil that was in the nacelle spilled down. I have a picture. It's all dripping down the tower and it drips right into the ocean. Okay, so, and that's one blade of hundreds of turbines.
Other
So,
questions?
yes. Yeah,
I was gonna say, the last time we had a meeting.
Yeah.
You talked about how the state itself was giving out permits. And saying that we as the towns did not have the right to make the decisions for ourselves, but the state was gonna make this decision. They were given the permit for Dowses, right?
what happened, the state, revised all of the permitting process for, renewable energy projects. And what they did was they kind of stripped the towns of their say. This has been passed. And, what is now going to happen when these projects come forward to the Energy Facilities Siting Board, the Energy Facilities Siting Board will collaborate with the town, ask the town what it thinks, and then create what's called a blanket permit. And they have constrained the time it takes to permit these projects. New England Wind 1 took, what was it, Hector, 3.5 years? And Avangrid's vice president wrote a very angry email saying, this took 3 years to get permitted. It should never take 3 years. The next thing you know, they came up with this scheme so that it all has to be done within 15 months. And the town has 90 days to, talk about it and then we'll do what we want. So I would say that the ability of the state to fast track this and push it through without our permission has grown exponentially under the current administration.
I think too that you've been very generous to our board, Barnstable Town Board, because the one before was very opaque about when we had meetings and they would not tell us and they did not tell us in time and they did not tell us the truth when we were at meetings.
Well, I'll say this about the town council. I think when it came to Vineyard Wind, I think they thought, yeah, this is just like the cables that run to Nantucket. They're gonna give us money, great, and to tell you the truth, there were some voices out there saying, wait, this is not good. And I can think of one person in particular that, tried to make sense of all this, but the town council, I think they had dollar signs in their eyes. And that was,
Decisions like that without at least studying what you're doing.
I drove by Coble's Beach and told my 5-year-old grandson, look, Jack, that's where the cables are gonna come in from the beautiful windmills out in the ocean and bring us electricity. And Jack said, where are they gonna put all the water? But, I didn't think anything of it. And then suddenly Avangrid decided to have these community meetings where they told us in detail what they were planning to do. You're going to do what? I remember sitting there with Stacy and others and going, you're not going to do that to our village. And then we learned, of course, they're not only doing it to Centerville, they want to do it to Osterville. And really the rest of Barnstable is going to suffer, in our opinion, as well. So I think public sentiment against this approach to getting us off of fossil fuels has grown and grown and grown. And I don't want to disparage the town council. They work hard, but I do want to say this. We have great friends on that town council now, and I am hoping they prevail because they are our friends and they have seen the light about this and about how it could hurt Barnstable. I'm looking at one of them over there. Yeah, Brian.
There's been a lot of discussion about kilowatt cost per hour.
Yeah.
However, they're.
Kilowatt hour, yeah.
Let's say today's $100 for a number. Hector, when the PPAs go through, what might that number look like? Just in theory.
So I think Eversource is charging about 25 cents a kilowatt hour today, if you buy that. Okay.
So,
It's hard to project, and I'd be guessing, but double or triple.
Yeah,
right, so are we still in the situation where we're all being asked to take the hit? Yet there's no guarantee we'll see any reduction, and most likely
No.
it will be an increase in cost. And the electricity could end up in Monroe, Connecticut.
Right.
Like, we're being asked to take the hit for that.
Yeah, and the health risks.
Amongst many, but the one issue of the kilowatt per hour, oh, it's gonna be a great savior for money and all. That's horse crap. And it's not even gonna stay here.
One of the big risks of these projects, Suzanne talked about the 20 miles of duck banks going through residential streets past, this gentleman's house on Leano Avenue and so forth. Do you think that's gonna enhance your property values? Will you have to put a sign in your front yard that says danger, high voltage power? That's not a rhetorical question, that's a real question.
And
So,
insurance will
you know,
cover
In terms of the hit that we can take,
Criminal.
there are multiple hits, but one of them is health, the big one is health and safety.
Sure.
The other one is a
Multiple
threat
hits,
to the aquifer.
multiple hits, multiple
And then the
promises that
third
it's
one
not been
is
delivered.
property values.
And
And
we're
if
here
property-
3 years later being told, you're still gonna have to take the hit.
Yeah, and if property values drop, assessments drop, guess what? The town,
taxes drop.
which is already stressed financially by the CWMP and by spending for the public schools, the town's tax revenues will go down. So.
We have another question right here. Go ahead, Mia.
I'm just curious, have they said anything about how they dispose of the dialectical fluid? I think we've read about that. and
Yeah.
I think it takes longer to break that down than it does, carbon.
It's definitely, the compounds that go into making dielectric fluid are highly toxic. We had a bit of a kerfuffle here in discussion with, especially at town hall. Oh, it's perfectly safe, it'll never sink into the ground. Well, it is soluble and it will sink into the ground. It may take a while to get to the aquifer, but spilling that, it could also run downhill in what's called the recharge of Waquaket Lake, and suddenly Waquaket Lake, which drains all of central Cape Cod, the outlet here is in East Bay, all right? So you could have contaminants running all through the mid-Cape. The tanker trucks that bring it and remove the used dielectric fluid, this is something that a very knowledgeable earth scientist said to us. You have to worry about the transport of this stuff too, on 6 and on, narrow country roads. And not to mention the fact, if there's a transformer explosion at one of these huge substations where they step down the power, their so-called containment system that they put in place, they call it a bathtub, is not infallible. They want you to think, oh, it's in a bathtub, so nothing would happen. If a really bad fire or explosion happened, the containment system would fail. And she indicated really clearly, precisely how that failure would happen. So this material would flood out of the substation. Bob Schulte?
Yeah, I just relate one anecdote regarding the dielectric fluids. It was a group of citizens that were meeting with the town manager and a group of the citizens of the town managers. And one of the requests we made numerous times, Hector was one of the individuals involved as well, was for what they call the safety data sheets on the dielectric fluid. What is actually in those? After repeated requests, we finally received something that Vineyard Wind had sent us, and it said it's mineral oil.
Yeah.
And we questioned that, and I have the letter back from the town manager where the folks at Vineyard Wind said, oh, we made a mistake. That was just the fluid we used to test it. Here's the real sheet, which we then had a doctor and some of the scientists look at, and there were 12 components that were part of the ingredients in the dielectric fluid that were all noted as potential carcinogenic materials. So the Vineyard Wind tried to initially pass off, it's just mineral oil, and then, oh, we made a mistake, we sent you the wrong sheet, here's the real one. So that's, when you talk about transparency.
And you're not even sharing the real punchline when one of our fellow travelers called the company that made it using the material safety data sheet number. And they said, and the guy said, that's not for cooling transformers. That's farm animal enema.
Right.
So then they came forward with a real data sheet and it's full of all this stuff they didn't want us to know about.
Can I just add something? Bob just triggered a thought. They made a mistake. It's important for everybody to know that Avangrid, this offshore wind business for Avangrid is a brand new line of business for them. The company has never built one of these things, or operated, or maintained, or decommission one of these. If you're a newbie in a highly technical, risky enterprise, mistakes can happen, and mistakes in this instance could be very serious. for the
So we have this gentleman and then Cliff after this gentleman, go ahead.
Careful with that gentleman word.
Okay, I'll try. You want,
No, that'll be fine here. My name is James Williams. Good afternoon, everybody.
Afternoon.
I'm a professional musician. Yes, there are such things. I'm also a resident of Osterville, probably in small with Diane. She lives with me sometimes. Usually we're in Europe. Do you hear me? I'll speak louder.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to live here. We live here, in summertime, we're one of those kind of people, and we live in the winters and we're in Germany. So I'm only saying it because, hearing these stories, and they're tragic. They're horrible. To think that such a gorgeous place as we live in, is being subjected to a nasty piece of work.
Yeah.
People are not playing the card properly. Anyway, I'm a comment. It doesn't really matter what I think too much. But I do think that something can be done about it. And I mention this because music is my living. And I've been doing it for a long time, until I'm right here and so forth. But I wanted to offer my services
okay, Jakes,
to do a concert. Said we need some money.
we do.
Okay. Well, yeah, thank you. Thanks for the clap. But I would appreciate, we'll get together with this. Is Cindy still here? I don't know if she's-
Cindy's not here right now.
we'll keep it.
Jakes is a famous musician, I must say that. He's quite well known,
Thank you.
so.
Anyways, another.
Thank you, Jakes. Thank you.
Well, I'm almost done.
Oh, okay.
That's a softball.
Yeah.
But I want to. We'll get something together this summer. We can do it here, or we'll get some good people together and raise some good time money,
Good.
good money, you know.
How about at the bandstand, Jakes?
Out here,
Outside.
anytime, but I want to make it, if possible, larger than that.
Oh,
there be a beer?
What's that?
Will there be beer?
Anywhere.
Why not?
In my backyard too, we do that anywhere. But anyway, it's an offer. I hope you take me up on it. We can get some good people around here. And I imagine all of you like music, at least a little.
Oh,
bit.
yes.
Great. So we'll do it, get some money together and.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi. Cliff Carroll wants to speak.
Excuse me, just a couple things. First of all, can you speak up?
Speak up, Cliff. Come on, Cliff. Get up here, Cliff.
Come on up.
Usually he has.
Now you're gonna be
Usually
brief.
he has giant posters at town council meetings, but he's not shy.
Cliff
Go ahead,
prefaces,
Cliff.
every time Cliff speaks, he says, I'm gonna make this real quick.
And he's
So,
on the
10 seconds.
There was just a couple points that Suzanne brought up, and I don't know if people are already aware of it or not, but the threat to our water system has already been created. They've built a transformer substation off Independence Park that's is supposed to take care of the electricity from the cable that's going through Cobbles Beach. That transformer already has 100,000 gallons of transformer oil, and it's sitting by what is called the Mar wells, which supply quite a bit of water for the Barnstable Village area and the Hyannis area. The transformer that they're proposing for the Park City Wind transformer is at the hotel at the top of Shoeflang Hill Road, right on the edge of Weequacket Lake, at one of the highest points in the aquifer. That's destined to have 125,000 gallons of transformer oil in it. And then when Suzanne brings up West Barnstable, you're all familiar when you leave Burger King exit on the Mid-Cape Highway and you start headed towards Boston, there's a fire tower there on the right-hand side that's been there forever. They have 28 acres of land tied up there. They propose to build almost a 28-acre site there. But their representative, Patrick Johnson, told myself and one of the select people for Barnstable that I gave them a rough estimate of how much transformer oil will be contained in that well. And that's all close to 200,000 gallons at the peak of one of the highest points of land in the whole Cape. on the top of our sole source aquifer, and a lot of West Barnstable is on, private wells. But in addition to that, the Mid-Cape Highway might be there, but it doesn't divide where the water would go into the well fields that supply 50,000 houses maybe, or roughly. So the threat is already arrived. It's right around the corner on the hotel site. And then the Dowses Beach cable, that's destined for the West Barnstable. And then I promise I'd be quick. So, if you, I don't know if you want to touch on the SF6 gas.
Oh, SF6 gas is, it's a greenhouse gas that's considered the most toxic greenhouse gas we know, known to humans. And they use a ton of it. And what happens is if there's a leak of SF6 gas, it's sulfur hexafluoride, it sucks the air out of people's lungs and they die immediately. It's a really bad gas, and there's been, it is increasing in our atmosphere at a rate that is really alarming a lot of the really bona fide environmentalists. These guys are not environmentalists, believe me. When we talk about SF6 gas, they don't like us even knowing about it, but they use it not only onshore, but offshore. They use the dielectric fluid offshore and onshore. So if there's a major catastrophe with one of those turbines, all the dielectric fluid in the nacelle, which is what's in a nacelle, like 50,000 gallons, something like that.
One nacelle has approximately 5,000 gallons of various transmission and cooling oils, but they have offshore transformer substations that have about 150,000.
Yeah, that's
already
right.
Built and sitting offshore.
The ESPs they look like oil drip, platforms, but that's where all the cables plug in and then the power gets stepped up. And then it gets transmitted across Nantucket Sound, gets transmitted while it's stepped up through our village, through our villages, through our town, and then gets stepped down at the substations. So we're exposed to the worst of it as humans, and that drives me crazy. We're gonna have to wrap it up. I promised Cindy we'd be out of here. Thank you, Cliff. Thank you very much.
Got a question.
Yep,
Hector, you're not done yet.
we've got to get out of here at
Full
5:30.
disclosure, okay. Could you just high level bring us through the economic benefit of these three projects to Barnstable?
There is.
High level.
Well, you have to look at you have to analyze them project by project.
Okay,
And the most recent contract, Jerry wants to talk about Riano Avenue, but the most recent project is the Park City Wind
right.
project, and the economic benefit over 25 years, $28 million
28 million
in today's dollars.
over 25 years.
Okay, Jerry Blakely wants to talk about Wiano for a moment. We have just a couple of minutes. I just don't want to hold Cindy up too long. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, first of all, I think on behalf of everyone, we have to thank Suzanne for putting this thing. Secondly, I don't know if you all are aware, I'll be really fast. We all know Avenue. Everybody talks about Dowses Beach, Franklin Beach. There's a little beach at the end of Riano Avenue we call Baby Beach. That is something that we think Avangrid is trying to get as a site, which is ridiculous, because there's no room there for all their equipment. But just be aware, and I know a lot of you have questions. I hope you signed up, because we'll send you the information.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more that we can be telling you. So please sign up, and we appreciate your support.
Jerry Blakely, thank you so much. And thank you all for coming.